Hey, I'm gonna call the meeting to order for the Administration Committee for August 20th. It's 5 p.m. We'll start with roll call.
Chair Burning is excused. Vice Chair Counter.
Present.
Supervisor Long.
Present.
Supervisor Fiedler. Present. Supervisor Shirley.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we want approval of the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes for July 16th, 2024? Seeing none, we'll have them approved as drafted. So under public comment, I'd like to invite Celeste Corbell, if I pronounce that correctly.
Pretty close. My
sorry.
name is Celeste Cobrell. I'm here with my spouse, John Gostovich. We've had our home in the town of Hudson for 31 years. Over those years, we've been in different districts, depending on where you guys draw the lines. We're in District 4 now. We've been in Bob Long's district previously. I'm here. I know that there is a meeting next week specifically on the topic of the nursing home, but this meeting is about the budget and where the county dollars go, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. I submitted a written public comment. Please take a look at that. I'm not going to read the thing over. You guys can read it. But what I want to emphasize is that when we're looking at specific expenditures, I think that budgets reflect not just what counties are required to do, but also our community's values and our priorities. And in that sense, budgets are kind of like moral documents. You know, what really matters to us? We put our money where our mouths are. And I know that there are some projections that county expenditures for supporting the loan payments for building the nursing home might double next year. And I just want to point out what a great deal you're getting, even if that doubles. We live on Lake Malibu, so our home is appraised quite a bit higher than the median. And I took a look at our 2023 tax bill, which is the amount that we paid in 2024. And, you know, that bill's gone up now to $9,639.36, which is a bit of a bite in our budget. But only $2,769.63 of that total actually goes to the county. The rest of the property tax goes to other things. And we understand that now about 3 cents out of $1 of county property tax goes to paying down the loan for building what we used to call the county nursing home. Now it's the health center campus. And when I look at our tax bill for what we pay to the county, you know, we're kicking in $83.09 to keep that facility owned by the county. It's a very high quality facility. It's available to everybody in our county. And even if you doubled that next year, that is a pittance to pay for having that high quality service available to everybody in our county. And for that amount, I think it would be a shame if we decided to sell it and possibly kick somebody's grandparents to the curb just to save the county a little bit of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak for public comment period? Anyone else for public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to business item number 1. So if we can have Dustin do presentation of the 2023 audit report. And I guess Jonathan Sherwood is the auditor, will be talking with us. Thank
Absolutely, yes. So my name is Jonathan Sherwood. I'm a principal with Clifton Larson Allen. I'm in charge of basically managing our engagement team over the field work and as well as over the financial statements, all the numbers, reports, and disclosures for the county audit. So if there's any questions during my presentation, please let me know. I am going to go over the audit summary It's a 6-page summary, so I'll bear you some of the pain and not go over the full 100-plus page audit report for you this evening. But if there's any specific questions in any of the departments or any of the other information that I'm presenting, please stop me as I go along. If I don't have the information off the top of my head, I do have the full audit report here, and that's at last case resort. Otherwise, Ken, Dustin, and the other various county employees here should hopefully be able to bail me out this evening. So, again, just prefacing my comments here by just stating that the full audit report, with everything in the audit report itself, is the property and the ownership over, of the county. Really, the only information that really belongs to CLA is our audit opinion. So before I dive into some of the numbers, I'll explain to you what our audit opinion is, some of the other information that we actually do in conjunction with our audit procedures, and as well as some various other statutory requirements that we help compile and file in terms or in conjunction with the audit. So again, I just want to express my thanks and gratitude to the county employees, obviously Dustin, the finance team, who we get very intimately involved with during the audit process, as well as all the various other department heads that come across in some of our rather intrusive at times audit procedures. So I very much appreciate the collaboration from both sides. It makes getting the audit done in a timely and effective manner much easier from our perspective. So thank you. So to start off with just overall what the audit opinion is and what it actually kind of means there for us, the audit opinion basically is we issue what's known as an unmodified opinion, also known as a clean opinion. From an outside auditor perspective, that's the highest level of assurance that an independent auditor can grant over the financial statements. So that just means that all of the amounts and the disclosures are free of any material errors or omissions, and they can be readily relied upon by county officials to make decision-making, or any third party from an outside perspective to make if there's any bond issuances or anything like that that needs to be done, or any state regulatory agencies. Next, one of the other reports that we actually look at or prepare for you is an internal controls report. Management letter comments back for you. So as part of the audit, we evaluate, test the design and the makeup of the internal controls just to make sure that they're operating as they're intended. And as part of those operations, at times there's some items that raise to the level of severity, I'll call it, that means that we as an independent auditor need to address them to the governing body. So those two material weaknesses is what they're called. Both of these items are same as last year items, so you're familiar if you've heard one of my spiels before. They're both common for an organization your size, and you're actually presenting only 2 of the typical 3 that I normally see, again, for an organization your size. The first being material audit adjustments, just basically meaning in order for us to draft this 100-page document that we end up issuing for you, we scour your books, we propose auditing adjustments that are material, meaning they're large enough that would definitely, had they not been made, they would impact a decision-making ability somewhere down the line. So just to let you know that we did make those audit adjustments. They are included in your audit report, and what that basically means, or the total I wanted to highlight here for you, the number of journal entries that we're proposing as an audit firm to get your financial statements ready. In 2023, we issued, proposed is the word that I'm searching for. We proposed 24 entries in 2023. That is actually a decrease from the prior year of about 29 entries overall. So just trying to give you some context of how much effort goes into preparing these, and just letting you know that your staff is making the concerted effort to drive down the additional, the level of intervention that your auditors basically need to place over your financial statements. So it's just something that we are striving towards from our end, as well as the county staff, to continue to make improvements over that process. Ultimately, a completely clean and quote unquote easy audit, we wouldn't need to propose any journal entries. That's like my pie in the sky ultimate goal. I would always expect to come into any organization and propose some journal entries, but the fewer the better from an outside auditor perspective. What that would basically entail to governance is all of those reports, those month-to-date reports that you're receiving from finance and admin would be completely free of any errors, and you could be definitely relying on those without any question of, oh, let's wait till the audited numbers to see where we shake out. If I'm not proposing any adjustments, they're fully reliable from the get-go. The next item to just discuss with you briefly is just limited segregations of duties. That just basically means that, in the various departments, anytime that there's any financial information being held or handled, at times they're limited to one person, two people throughout the entire transaction cycle. Obviously, to the extent possible within the finance team, you've segregated those duties as much as possible, but all the way throughout the various county departments, there's times where cash is being handled by one individual, being deposited into the bank by that same individual with very few backups. Typically in your smaller departments, typically like the county parks situation or at seasonal employees, that kind of thing. So just know that a compensating control over that is a good, strong finance team, as well as those various committees that governance sits over and oversees. So if there's at any times that you're getting any again, monthly information or reports back from these department heads, I encourage, from a personal note, I encourage any board member just to be willing to ask questions so you can maintain that transparency. And just know that if something just doesn't look right from a governance standpoint, that a compensating control is questions and transparency from the top down, just to make sure that it's reported correctly, it's timely, that type of information. So again, just overall, they're known as material weaknesses. That's the CLA, or not the CLA, that's the accounting jargon overall for you, just to know what they're actually known as. Nothing that raises a red flag from our perspective that you need to take drastic measures in order to correct. One of the other things that's fairly unique to a county audit versus some of the other audits that we do perform is the nursing home in itself. The healthcare campus is considered its own separate audit. So we audit them separately, but for the terms of your full county audit, we roll all that information up and it is presented as part of your full county audit as well. So again, we did issue an unmodified or again a clean opinion over the amounts and disclosures of the healthcare campus audit as well. The other items there, before we flip over there, sorry, Ken, that we do prepare as well as in combination of our audit procedures. We do an unaudited Form A, which is a filing with the Department of Revenue that's due May 15th, that helps the state do some preliminary state aid calculations. The final Form A, and also known as the Tax 16 report, that's a big hard deadline for the Department of Revenue. And that was due July 31st, which again, that has been filed. And then in terms of all the federal money that flows through the various departments, since we're receiving over that line in the sand of a $750,000 from the federal limit, we perform what's known as a federal single audit, which is a compliance audit, which is very important, that makes sure that the federal agencies that are granting you those dollars can rely upon the county that all those funds are being spent in their intended purpose. And if there would be any compliance issues with that, we would then file those findings with those various agencies. So that report isn't technically due until September 30th. We're very close to finalizing and issuing that report, so that is in progress. You'll be seeing those results here, hopefully in the very near future. With that, there's a lot of just compliance program testing, making sure that we're following all the required grant expenditures are allowable, and a lot of compliance testing there. So there's quite a bit of extra heavy lifting that doesn't necessarily impact your full financial results. And then lastly, we do assist the county in preparing the Medicare cost report as well in combination with the nursing home audit. So all that being said, I can dive into some very high-level fiscal results here for the county. Again, these are all balances and everything through 12/31/2023. And the first is the general fund. So really, these are all, and we typically like to do a trend analysis here. So up on the screen, you see, your 4-year trend analysis, and your general fund budget sheet summary. As a reminder, that's 12/31 snapshot in time balances as of the end of the year. So really, it's a good way of saying, okay, if something really jumps off the page and there's a severe swing one way or the other, it would be at least a talking point of kind of drilling down and figure out kind of what happened. Sometimes it's some timing things here or there or whatever that's out there. So really, as of 12/31/2023, you're basically in the same ballpark as where you have been over the last few years. Some of the other larger, like the big discrepancy there you'll see, which is known as a deferred inflow. Some people might be familiar with the deferred revenue. That all has to be, it's completely attributable to some ARPA funding that was out there. The county received a bunch of funds up front, and then the federal government said, okay, here's what you need to spend it on at a later time. So during 2022, you see that deferred inflow number really jumped up to about $34.4 million, and then it kind of dropped down right back in 2023 to kind of a comparable number. And that's really the story behind that one specifically. But overall, there's, of all of this information, really the important information to really draw your attention to is just to figure out how well is St. Croix County doing in terms of its fiscal health. So that's really why we kind of boil it down into those three highlighted rows there for you. And it starts with a focus on fund balance. Fund balance, also known as equity, your reserves of the county. So within your fund balance, that gets broken down into a number of different buckets or categories, and you're utilizing 4 of them. You've got non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned. The first 2, non-spendable and restricted, those are resources, that's equity of the county that can be used eventually to meet future county obligations or future county needs. However, certain things need to either take place or they're just restricted for some reason. So non-spendable items, typically things like prepayments are included there. Technically, you've already spent those, or they just maybe need to be collected first, and that's where your delinquent taxes and tax deeds basically are. So you have assets on your books, but you can't access the liquidity. You can't access those resources until something else takes place. The restrictions, that's typically restricted from a state or outside state agency or an outside organization. Think donations. If I give you $1,000 and say, thou shalt use this on XYZ activity, that's what those restrictions are typically in place for. So very minimal amounts there. And then that leaves you the last 2 fund balance categories, which the board or governance can have some sort of control over. The first being assignments. So you've, as a county board policy, the finance team has the ability to assign fund balance for a specific purpose or use in the future. So almost $1.7 million was set aside for specific activities. So that's already been designated for those activities. That 1.6, almost 1.7 million can be reallocated, but it does take some additional board discussion and resolutions in order to reassign those at times. That basically boils it down to what are your true reserves of the county? That's just over $24 million at the end of 2023. So in terms of, again, what can we do with those fiscal resources, we usually compare that to the total expenditures, and we calculate that ratio at the very bottom, basically meaning if we have just our reserves to live off of, how long or what percentage of the year could we basically operate on if we didn't take in another dollar? So you're basically sitting at total expenditures of just about $48 million, compared that to your just over $24 million in fund balance, of unassigned fund balance. That's roughly 50.5% of your year-to-date expenditures you could fund out of your fund balance. That's just a way of thinking about it. If you didn't take any other money in, you could still fund and run the county for essentially 6 months time period. The county does have a minimum fund balance policy. It states it's typically between 25 and 35%, 35 plus or minus 3%, before you're going to really start making some decisions on, basically spending down that fund balance. And I know that Ken had obviously highlighted here for me this evening that you've got fund balance transfers on your agenda later on. So that's just one way to think of where you're sitting at the end of the year. For me, from an outside auditor perspective, the general rule of thumb is right in that 25 to 33%. That's what you're going to want to see as an unassigned fund balance. That's where, again, an outside agency like a bond rating company or somebody just picking up your financial statements would look at that and say you're fiscally healthy. You're properly budgeting yourself. If you start dipping down below that, you're going to start restricting yourself and other various internal decision-making abilities. And if you get too low on that end, then you could potentially have some negative impact in terms of financing. So like bond ratings and whatnot really drives off of that number as well.
Jonathan, how do we compare to other counties with a fund balance?
It's kind of a tricky question to answer right in 2023, specifically because of all of this lovely ARPA and federal funding that's flowed in. You can look at other counties in the area, and you will see that number actually kind of jump. I have one county that's in the 80 to 90 range at the moment, and that's strictly because a lot of those ARPA dollars that flowed into the county had been sitting there in unassigned fund balance, and now they're finally starting to, due to various supply chain issues, ordering equipment and that kind of stuff. In 2024, that number is really dropping down. So overall, you're fairly on the level, very comparable between the 4 years that's presented here. So overall, in western Wisconsin and the other, off the top of my head, I can't remember how many total counties CLA audits in the area. It's more than a few. The typical that we're seeing out there as of late has probably actually been greater than your 50% because of that issue. But on a historic basis, St. Croix County has been probably right in the midpoint to upper midpoint, the upper middle class, so to speak, of fund balance in terms of fiscal health. So in terms of how you're doing on paper, if you look at just drilling down to these numbers, you can very, comparable apples to apples, looking at operations. St. Croix County is doing extremely well. Another tidbit there that I wanted to highlight in terms of your total expenditures that you're sitting there. In 2023, you've got almost $48 million in total actual expenditures. If you compare that to what your total budgeted expenditures were, that was about $46.8 million. So you're roughly over budget by about $3 million in total from your budget to your actual. And that $3 million kind of quote unquote over budgetness that we have there was all capital items, capital outlay items, which are not part of the general fund county budget. So overall, all things considered, you're controlling your year-to-date expenditures to the best of your ability, comparing them to your budget compared to your actual, and that's all within quote unquote the same ballpark, for a lack of a better terminology there for you. So overall, the operational strength of the general fund is very healthy. Any questions on the general fund before I highlight the rest of the activity here for you? Switching gears a little bit here, item number 2 is your special revenue funds. So these are all separately tracked activities with the revenue sources that are coming in are restricted for these specific purposes. So the first one is the Health and Human Services Fund. It's a separate fund on your books again, and these are all of the year-end the fund balances or your reserves at year end, which will be or can be used to meet future obligations. So during 2023, the Health and Human Services Fund ended the year with $4.2 million in reserves. That's actually a decrease of about $1.1 million. And you can see the other last few years, you've had some pretty nice increases in 2021 compared to 2022. In 2020, again, before, it's kind of the year of COVID when everything was really shut down, you basically had a flat, $854,000 increase in that one specific year. So really, again, I attribute the recent history of the last 3 years. If you look at a lot of the programs that have been in operation and kind of the results of a lot of that funding, again, from COVID, ARPA, a lot of those types of programs have flowed into this specific department in 2021 through 2023, and in 2023, a lot of those programs have started to wind down, so a lot of increased spending in those specific programs itself. The other thing to note here for your Health and Human Services Fund is the current year levy in 2023 did increase by about $500,000, and that is it's still on par. You're within, almost $8 million of current year levy that's going into 2023, but that's not too far off of where you were in the prior years of $7.3 million and just over $7 million in 2021.
Yeah, I might add the loss that we see in the Health and Human Services Fund. A large portion of that is attributed to out-of-home child placement through Children's Services. So those are court-ordered placements. They can range from $200,000 to $300,000, but we also have one that's costing $480,000 per year. So that's one child that's out-of-home placement. So we've seen an increase. So up through about 2020, 2021, we were averaging about $1 million a year on that expense line item. Now we're averaging about $2 million a year. So that's where some of it's coming in. I just can't increase the budget fast enough to catch up with that experience that's occurring.
And unfortunately, that's not an uncommon thing that we're hearing from the rest of our counties here in western Wisconsin. It's one of those budgeting, almost throw a dart at the wall when it comes to certain programs like child placement and whatnot. You really don't know until you get partway through the year and you kind of really see what those caseload is. And a lot of it, again, as you mentioned, Ken, a lot of it is it's court ordered. So there isn't any decision making that you can really do to offset those placements, unfortunately.
Yeah. To get on my soapbox just a little bit on that subject. So the child is costing $480,000 a year. We project 2 more years, they'll age out of the system. So what happens to them then? Well, then they get placed as an adult, and then the state pays for it. So if it's a juvenile, the county has to pay for it with taxpayers' dollars. We don't get reimbursed anything from the state. But if it's an adult, then the state will pay for it. So I don't know, that doesn't quite sound right to me. I mean, what's the differentiation of why the state will pay for adults, but they don't pay for juveniles? When we have no say over it, it's court-ordered by a judge who's a state employee. There's probably something broken with that system. So if you want to talk to any of your legislatures, I have an item for you.
Just going over the other remaining other special revenue funds, and again, these are all restrictions that any typically grants, revenue dollars coming into these activities are restricted for these purposes. You've got your various other special revenue funds listed here. Really, the only ones that I typically highlight in a presentation such as this is anything that has a negative fund balance there, meaning that the amount that has been received has actually been exceeded by the overall expenses. So that's your Stop Drugs Fund. So it's in the hole by about $11,000 for the year, or cumulative over the whole life of the program, excuse me. So, that's one of those, just verifying that we understand what that activity is, we understand that the grant coming into it and what it's actually offsetting and supporting in terms of the expenditures or that program that's being run. And then in the terms of if it becomes negative, it's just an item just to keep an eye on. If it's fairly within ballpark here, $11,000 in total it's in the hole. At times, if that starts growing out of control, again, realizing what it takes to actually fully fund and support that activity, because then the only other, resolution to that would be to increase any county levy dollars to help support those activities. So that's the only one that, again, just the overall comment, not specifically, quote unquote, picking on the Stop Drugs Fund activity, but just knowing that if you start noticing the financial health or the fiscal health of these activities really start dropping, just doing a little bit more of an analysis of what's going on in that fund, and then potentially, do we need county levy dollars to be injected into that activity to fully fund it and fully support it? The next item or the next type of fund that you have separately on your books is your capital projects fund. Definitely a lot of activity in this fund over the last few years. Just take a look down the hallway. It's all your capital construction related to this whole facility here, as well as any other major capital pieces of capital that are purchased out of the capital projects fund. So these, again, are the resources that are remaining that have obviously already been allocated for the project in total. So they already have been earmarked, set aside for this project. And this is just the whole fund that is experiencing and just maintaining, keeping track of, so to speak, of all of the related construction expenditures. In 2023, you had just over $34.4 million in current year expenses, which ultimately are your capital outlay expenditures. The county is very well aware of, finance, admin is very well aware of. There's unspent bond proceeds, obviously, within these that are invested and earning a fairly healthy rate of return on them. There's some arbitrage rules, is the fancy vocabulary word for everybody out there. The county is basically forbidden by federal law to basically be in the game of borrowing money only to invest it. So arbitrage laws basically limit the amount of interest that you can make on such activity. And this is a fun and exciting thing for me personally. This is the first client in my 16-year plus career will actually be hitting arbitrage rules. So those will be basically expenditures as soon as we incur those payments. That'll be a payment back to the government there of limiting our interest return here. So again, kind of a side note from a personal standpoint. So the $60 million will be spent over the life of those projects. Next item is your debt service fund. Again, these are reserves set aside just to meet future principal and interest payments. You can see that there's a massive drawdown in 2022. It's a planned drawdown, meaning that you had quite a bit of principal and interest required payments that were made in 2023, which we're definitely, again, it's all scheduled out based on your loan repayment schedules. We'll get into the remaining long-term debt that's out there. Principal and interest payments for 2023 amounted to just over $14.4 million. $9.2 million of that was principal, with the remaining just over $5 million in interest payments that were due during the year. Switching gears a little bit now into what are known as enterprise funds, also known as business type activities in the governmental accounting world. So for those business owners out there, anybody that's read a quote unquote normal set of financial statements, these have different things that you will see listed in these financial statements that you won't see on page 1 in the general fund, such as your capital assets are now listed on the front page of your financial statements. Long-term debt is actually buried within here as well. So when we're looking at the financial operations of these next two activities, there's a couple of things to take into consideration. So first is your healthcare campus. Again, you're going to notice things on here like your WRS liability and deferred inflows. You've got your capital assets on your books. So then you have things like non-cash items, non-cash expenditures like depreciation that factor into your change in net position. So you can see in 2023, your change in net position is about $660,000 loss for the year. And again, that includes some non-cash items that amount to just over $870,000 for the year. So your WRS change in the activity of that specific item was about $268,000, and then depreciation expense for the year was just over $610,000. So those two items together are included in that negative change in net position. You know, factor that in, you are going to be basically cash flowing itself for fiscal year 2023. Outside of that, you know, the big takeaway, the continued takeaway out of any healthcare or county-owned nursing home activity is continued struggles with staffing and just needing the needed reliance on traveling pooled nursing assistants. Those costs are extraordinarily expensive in the long run. It's just been a general trend in the nursing home world overall, regardless if you're a public or a private entity. One of the biggest challenges is just retaining qualified staff. I know that it's just really the secret in the sauce there is just increase salaries, and you're going to start to continue to attract qualified personnel, which then just increases your overall expenditures. Your next enterprise fund that you have on the books, the last remaining one, is your highway department. And again, it's the same type of situation there. You have non-cash items on your books. Your change in net position there is about $302,000 for the year, so that's an increase in your net position, your net income, so to speak. And again, included in there is those two other non-cash items of just over $2.2 million impact to the highway department. So that is, as well, it's cash flowing itself. You're maintaining your charges to services for the other municipalities and the other governmental entities within the county that you do work for. You're definitely certainly covering your costs and following all of the various DOT charges for services, so to speak, and then any other chargebacks that you can make to the various to the county in total. The current levy year increase, so the amount of levy dollars that went to support highway activities also did increase by $320,000 for the year. On our final page here of information, of financial information here, you've got your internal service funds. So again, these are services that are set aside, or the activities set aside where the various county departments, county employees, and the county in total is making premium payments, like health insurance. Health insurance premiums are the revenues to this fund, and then the offsets are the claims or the expenditures to, use up those fiscal resources. So these are the resources that are going to be used, that are remaining to be used in future periods again. Similar type activity here. If something really starts decreasing in a dramatic fashion, you'd have to look at that specific activity and make sure that the premium being charged is adequate over there in order to support the level of claims that activity is experiencing. Ken and I obviously have talked on this one as well, specifically the health insurance fund. He's always well on top of that one come budget season, very, very keen on the benefit being offered to the various county employees. How much is the county going to contribute versus how much is then at the behest of the county employee? And then what type of claims history is the health insurance fund experiencing? So you can see in 2023, it had a pretty significant drawdown. The 2022 balance was $3.2 million, and now you're down to $1.9 million, kind of dipping into kind of an area that you were not feeling extremely comfortable with in terms of having those reserves set aside. So if you have another claims year like you did last year, your health insurance fund in 2024, if you have another claims year like you did in 23, you're going to be in some, fiscal peril, so to speak. So the solution there again is some additional injection of resources, county levy dollars or any other reserves from the general fund could be used and transferred in here to support your health insurance fund. The rest of it is basically maintaining their balances from one year to the next, basically meaning that the charges coming into it are there and supporting the incurred expenses. The last item that I want to discuss with you here and go into a little bit more detail on is your long-term obligations. So this is all the long-term debt out of all of the issuances that are out there. You've got in total 7 total debt issuances outstanding. So that includes both your GO bonds and your GO notes. Again, just to let you know that there is a little bit of a change. And if you look at the total long-term obligations, it's kind of hard to make a comparison from one year to the next because this schedule does it's at the ebb and flow of certain items, such as, that WRS pension asset liability. For a number of years, that item is actually an asset, so it's a reduction, where in 2023, it's actually hitting your books as a liability. Again, this is my friendly reminder that that specific item, you really don't have any personal or any local decision-making over that one, but it is impacting your numbers in a very dramatic way here. So again, side note is we do a lot of effort on our end to actually make sure that that number is right and properly presented, but you locally really don't care about that number. The numbers that you guys are really interested in is your GO bonds and GO notes. So in total, again, of those 7 issues that are outstanding, you've got $1.4 million that's falling off in 2024. That's the current year obligation. $1.2 million is going to fall off between 2023 and 2026. And then the remaining 5 issuances are remaining and they're outstanding through the first one of those falls off in 2035 and the others continue through 2042. The reason I kind of explain that big old, when things start falling off is your GO obligations is kind of a strong budgeting tool you can use locally. Within your levy limit worksheet of the county, there is you've got your base levy that you're allowed to increase your levy by every year. And then there's basically a stopgap of saying, okay, state law allows you to levy 100% of all of your principal and interest payments that are due that next year. So if you've got the total maximum you can levy under state law, well, they can basically give you an exemption of, okay, well, we're going to guarantee you're going to make your general obligation debt. So that's basically a hole that you can use or a plug you can use to help fund general operations. Just letting you know that you do have that tool available to you. Counties, surprisingly, in my opinion, they're kind of surprisingly find at times where they've been relying on this budgeting tool, I'll describe it that way, and then if all of a sudden you start dropping off of these debt issuances out there, you don't have that tool available to you. So then your level, instead of having a very flat level levy going from one year to the next, if you all of a sudden lose that budgeting tool, you're required then to reduce your levy. And then the next year you'll go out and borrow, and then your levy can bop right up to the typical operating level that you've been living under for the last number of years. So you're within that time period, you have the proper GO debt available to you, so that'll allow you to then maintain that rather flat and not dramatic shifts in levies. You do have a borrowing limit, which you see here at the end. You're using about 14.8% of your statutory limit. A county is never going to come up to its overall limit from a state compliance issue. Regulatory issue, but you would be very highly leveraged as soon as you would hit 20 to 25% of your overall levy. Again, that's when you'd probably, from constituencies, you would get a lot of angry taxpayers saying, you're borrowing so much that you're making property taxes unsustainable, so to speak. So you're using 14.8% of your overall budgetary limit. So in the need of future borrowings, you do have some ability to go out and issue more GO debt if necessary, and it's deemed and approved by governance. So overall, those are my comments in total on the financial information. This last page, page 6, is more or less just general information, just letting you know some challenges coming that the county will be facing coming down the line from the Government Auditing Standards Board, which basically dictates all the rules and regulations of how we calculate things for your audit. There's some changes in the guidance that's coming down the line. One of the more important ones is GASB 101, which is basically how the county values its compensated absences, paid time off, vacation sick leave policies. The assumptions and estimations that go into that calculation are required to be looked at differently now, and that's going to start in 2024. So your long-term debt page will change a little bit in terms of how we value those. We're going to have to rely on HR and the finance team to kind of look at some historical trends of when, if somebody has a lot of vacation sick leave, when do they use that? How much is typically used in a given year? So it's just going to go into changing our calculation a little bit. The other big one that's going to really impact things, thankfully, isn't going to impact us until fiscal year 2026. And that's the overall finance reporting model improvement. Basically, what they're looking at there is changing the way that we actually present some of the information in the audit. So by that time, I'm hoping things kind of settle down, and we don't have to really worry too much about making a bunch of changes within our 100-page plus document, which, again, it's not going to impact any budgetary information or the way you make any decisions from one year to the next, but it's all about keeping the regulators happy on that one. So concludes my comments here for you this evening. Any specific questions I can address or anything?
Thank you, Jonathan. There's a lot of good numbers there. I think most of us are following you pretty well. I guess I'm just going to ask a very high-level question, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any particular concerns that you have that you uncovered, or any concerns going forward that we might at least need to be aware of?
Overall, with your specific situation, no. I know that you've got a very strong finance team. The general comment that I'll make to any county government, any municipality in Wisconsin right now is the last number of years, we've had a lot of federal and state money flowing into our coffers, so to speak, and just understanding from a budgetary standpoint, you do have a very healthy fund balance now, but it's very easy to spend the same dollar twice, 3 times on any wish list capital item. So I strongly encourage any board. You guys are very, very sophisticated in total of your general budget. I strongly encourage people not to budget recurring expenditures, funding positions out of your fund balance, because those dollars aren't being replaced any longer. That's just a broad brush comment, nothing specific to St. Croix County. But overall, you guys are doing tremendous in terms of your fiscal policies in place. Really, there aren't any specific concerns.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? No? I think the only other thing that's brought attention was on the first page of your document under your heading. You had our location in Ellsworth.
I'm a numbers guy, so that's what I'm going to go with. Appreciate that. I'll get it corrected for the full county board, promise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks. You did an awesome job with this, so thank you very much.
Hard thing to thread the needle of. Too much information, not enough.
All right, we'll move on to item number 2 of the business with Ken on the resolution authorizing fund balance transfer.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up to where we are in the packet. This audit report's really long. I don't know what page I'm on. I can't see it. Oh, I got a ways to go yet, don't I? Nope, I went past it. Work plan. There's the KIP. I'm getting close. All right, fund balance transfer. So this would be a resolution for the county board to consider looking at our fund balance. So we're $4,396,000, if I'm remembering correctly, over the amount that we have in our policy, 35% plus or minus 3%. So my recommendation is to take, just sort of round it off, but to take 4 million of that and allocate it to the capital improvement fund. You'll see, because the KIP is the next item on the agenda, I've modified that to reflect what a $4 million fund balance transfer does to that fund. And it gives us a really good outlook for the next 5 years of being able to cover the recurring projects that we have. Not any big buildings like a jail expansion or the highway shop, but I think it'll allow us to reduce the borrowing to just the highway shop. So it reduces the amount of borrowing that would be required next year for our capital improvements and sets us up really well for the next 5 years. The other thing that we typically talk about on this fund balance transfer is potentially transferring some money to the debt service fund. And what I would say is, if you just bear with me, I have an alternate plan for that. We'll go over it in more detail next week. But I think there's a solution there where we can get a win-win and accomplish that same goal. So my recommendation for this year's excess fund balance is to move it all into the KIP, which in the long run saves the taxpayer money twice because we don't have to borrow, we don't have to pay interest, we don't have to pay bond issuance cost.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the fund balance transfer.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Hey, any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Right, moving on to item number 3, resolution approving the 2025 to 2029 capital improvement plan.
Yeah, the capital improvement plan, we went over that at the committee of the whole, and so we made a few adjustments based upon the recommendations from the committee of the whole, so those are reflected in this sheet. The other changes then that I made since then was to reduce that borrowing down to 7.5 million, just to match the amount that we'll need for the highway shop facility. And then we'll use $3.5 million of fund balance to cover the rest of the projects. The one thing I would point out, and only because it was a really close vote, I'm going to blow this up so we can maybe actually see it. It was a really close vote at the committee of the whole. It was almost even, I think, was the Eckerd Bluffland project. So we did move the Eckerd Bluffland project back to 2026 as a start. But and partially because of that transfer in that we've just done of the $4 million of fund balance, that leaves us positive all the way through the next 5 years to be able to cash flow all the projects in there, other than the highway shop and the government center addition of the jail. So I was going to ask if you wanted to consider changing the Eckerd Blufflands from 2026 to 2025 with a reduction from 2 million to 1.5 million. You know, hearing the debate and the discussion at the committee of the whole, that might be a compromised position that the full county board would consider. I didn't want to make that change because it wasn't brought up at the meeting at all, but I would leave that up to your discretion if you wanted to modify this resolution to reflect that change.
Yeah, I think the real concern at the committee of the whole was borrowing money to start that project. And I think that if there is a way that we can actually cash flow that project to get it started, I think that there would be a lot of acceptance at the board level, but I'd like to know what everybody else thinks. I really liked what Jason did in terms of modifying that whole approach in that project. And if we have the ability to do it without borrowing money, I think we should consider it.
Go ahead. There we go. I would agree. I think borrowing it next year, we'll get into the rest of the resolution for next year, so I won't talk about it yet, but I have enough issue with next year without having another. Have any comments?
I'm trying to recollect all the discussion we had on it, but was there some discussion that the 2 million was needed in the first year of expenditures to get it underway in a thoughtful way? And would $1.5 million be too little? And is that a reason to keep it at 26, or can we do a substantial amount of work with $1.5 million without wasting money?
Yeah, that was the big discussion, and when we were originally talking about it, they were pretty insistent on the 2 million. After hearing the feedback, though, from the committee of the whole, Robbie and Jason got together and they said, well, we could probably get by with 1.5 and still get most of it done. So they kind of tightened up and sharpened their pencil a little bit. So we thought that that would be maybe a potential compromise to be able to reduce the scope of it a little bit, to get it moved back up into 2025 and actually get that project kicked off.
Because I think some of that discussion dealt with, putting in a parking lot that might have to be torn up later if we didn't do it right the first time. And so they think they can do it right the first time and not tear up something we've built.
Correct, yes, yeah. We still don't want to do it, halfway or do it incorrectly and waste money. They're going to do it the right way if they're going to do it.
So I guess we're kind of in the discussion before we started our.
You can discuss before a motion.
Oh, you can?
Committee, you can, yes.
Okay. Do we have is there a motion to move forward with this? Or,
I was going to defer to a member of our community development committee if he'd like to make it.
right. Which is us two.
Since we have two members of our community development, I really am interested in your perspective on what we think we should do. Because you guys have been involved in those discussions all along.
I think for myself, one of the things that I'm also looking at and we hear a lot about is that we're dealing with the Eckert Bluffland area there with all of the adjacent neighbors. And as things get underway and we develop that park, it's going to be able to limit some of the issues that we have with the neighbors dealing with the hunting. The hunting becomes issue because there's a lot of concern over, it is a rifle area. And where, if it were shotgun or just bow hunting, it'd be one thing, but with the problems with that, there's a lot of concern that's been brought up with neighbors of stray shots going off into neighboring parcels that are along the river and safety of their people. So getting this off the ground at an earlier stage is probably a benefit for us. Not that we personally have liability, but in the long run, looking at the neighbors and dealing with that, the hunting issues, there's an understandable amount of issues that they're bringing forward that we need to really think through. so.
To move it up to next year, I don't think I would support that. I think that, Supervisor Counter has brought up before about using military labor. I think we need to really look at that a little bit more, see if we can save some taxpayer money by doing that. But by doing that, we're at least more than a year out, probably 2 years for doing that. So I think we need a little deeper dive at that and see, is it worth it or is it not? And what we can kind of gain from that. I just think in this next year's budget with the highway building already, I personally have a real problem asking for 7.5 million in additional debt when clearly our numbers for sales tax are showing that we're in a recession. So I have an issue with it.
And I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree. I would really, if we can, work the military angle on some of this. It would be it's a win-win situation for us because the military gets exceptional training, and when they're done with it, it's something that it's a long-lasting element where they can say, hey, we did this. So otherwise, they go down to Fort McCoy or other locations and they do something and then they tear it all apart again because it's a training area. So they can't leave permanent things. So having them involved, it takes, it's not something we're going to be able to do in the next year or two, possibly even 2 years, because it takes also, it's the organizational portion of bringing them in, but it's also bringing in expert staff that would be able to come in and have oversight as they're doing it. So you've got to think of this as that this is a training program for these guys that are coming in and doing it. We're getting all of the manpower, the tools and equipment to do the project. But as far as like the engineering and some of the other components, they're reliant on staff from the county or staff through a contract. So long-term for the trail system, that they would be the ones for the trails that I would suggest. We have units in Hammond, I believe, that actually are trained for doing rope bridges and those types of things. So they already have, they have some of the qualities and the skills needed. But as far as for bringing in the roads and the infrastructure to get the project off the ground, the road structures and stuff would be probably more of a county project through the highway department. And for that part, I think that's the thing that we would want them, that we could move ahead with right away. But as far as the other infrastructure needs for developing the trail systems and stuff, that may take a little bit of finesse first to get that plan put together so we can, there's a lot of components to try to do that if we want to go that route.
So I guess I'm a little confused now. Are you guys suggesting that we just hold off till 2026, or would it be worthwhile to allocate some funds in the KIP to kind of get that started from an infrastructure and road standpoint? I'm not quite sure that I could tell where you were coming at.
Well, if we're doing, like I said, it would be just the road package at first. I would suggest against doing the trail systems if we're considering doing this alternative. They did use the military elements to do the New Richmond project, which they did a at Freedom Park. They did a trail system all the way around the park, and then they also brought in engineer units for doing the actual construction of the Freedom Center. So it's about a 16,000 square foot facility that's currently framed right now, that the military had a huge portion of they pretty much took on all the labor part, and then there were some local contractors that were involved with that project for oversight. But if we're gonna do something, I think, if we wanted to get things started, just to have things out, 2025 wouldn't be bad for starting road infrastructure. The latest 2026, mainly because of consideration of the neighbors and the dealing with that. I'd hate to let it spread out any further than that, just for the fact of the potential issues working with them.
So what would the numbers be just to basically get some of the road infrastructure started?
Well, I think that 1.5 million is primarily all the road work. Yeah, I think there was only one trail that was planned, and that's kind of where, if they run out of money, that's what gets cut first. What they want to do is they want to change the entrance coming off of Highway 35 to make it safer to get in there, create the road that goes back to a parking area so they can separate the park users from the residents that live there. And that's primarily what the first phase is. And then there was one trail, and that's the next thing that would be built if there's still funds available. But there's lots of more trails in the future years.
I guess I'll say that if we were,
Could I just ask Ryan real quick? Is this something that we should decide tonight based on the information we have in front of us? Or do you think community development would want to consider this option and come back to us? Or do we have enough information to make a decision, a recommendation tonight?
well, I'll say that for me personally, I would support $1 million to 1.2 for the park, but if that's the case, then we need to bring the county highway building in like half in order for that to happen. That's the way I see it, but I don't see us spending 7.5 on the highway building and another 1.5 or whatever, 1 point whatever it is on there. I know the vote was close on committee of the whole. I don't think there's really any support I don't see the supports there, but that's just me.
So what I'm hearing is leave it at 2 million for 26. What I'm gathering we're hearing is leave it at the 2 million as proposed for 2026.
I think that's probably the smart thing to do, at least as far as the KIP is concerned, and it can always bring it up again during the budget process if we need to. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the capital improvement plan as published.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Bob Long and a second by Bob Fiedler. Any further discussion? Okay, go ahead.
In the resolution, we have the sentence 8, or lines 8 and 9, talking about the 7.5 in debt. Do we need to include that at this point in order to move the KIP plan forward?
Yeah, so what the resolution is doing is it's outlining what projects are going to be done and what our intended funding sources are. Now, it does spell out that that has to be approved separately. There is a separate approval process to actually issue the debt, but you're saying this is the plan. So it's a capital improvement plan. Here's the plan. This is what we're going to spend. This is what we're going to fund it with. And that's the plan that the county board then is adopting. So it's giving guidance to the staff then to say, all right, go forward and start working on the debt plan. We've told you the outline of what we want. Now go work on that. It does require future approvals, but it's giving direction to the staff.
I mean, I said it earlier, I think that re-looking, I know that we talked about this at committee of the whole with the highway department building, but knowing what we know now from the sales tax numbers that were coming in, that were, I mean, technically in a recession, I think we should really second guess and think about this 7.5 million. You know, if we could figure out a way to bite off half of it now, and maybe half of it in 5 years, I think we'd be in a better position, personally. I mean, to ask for all of that in the economic condition that we're in, and I personally think it's gonna get worse before it gets better, so I don't know that that's something that I can approve, I can stand behind.
Yeah, I guess, I personally, I think it really needs to stay in the KIP and be part of the budget. I think it's important that we move ahead with that project, and I'm hoping that in another week we'll find other ways that we might be able to reduce our debt payments. And so I think the time is right, and my motion was basically to approve the KIP as it's published, which would include that number in 2025.
Okay, do we have any other discussion? Anyone want to add anything? Okay. All in favor of the motion to approve the 2025 capital improvement plan, 2025 to 2029 capital improvement plan, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Nay.
So we have all right, we'll move on to resolution approving the step increases for the Register of Deeds second deputy. Audrey?
So the current second deputy in the Register of Deeds office was hired in 2013 into that role and position. Due to the many changes to the wage grid over the last 11 years, it has resulted in her being placed at step 1 in our current wage grid. When that happened, it didn't really create much of a compression issue with the existing employees, but they had an open FTE at that time that they were choosing not to fill. Now, as it's gotten busier in their office, they are going to fill that position. So that has created a compression issue of bringing somebody brand new in at the same step as an existing long-term employee. So they are requesting a 2-step increase to help alleviate some of that compression.
Do we have any questions for Audrey?
I'll move to approve the resolution adding additional step increases for the Register of Deeds second deputy.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion by Bob Long and second by Ryan Shirley. Any further discussion?
Could we just have comment from the county administrator or the HR director further on their thoughts on it? Is this, we know it's been requested, do they support it as well?
Yeah, if I didn't recommend it, you wouldn't see it, so. So, that's kind of how that works. I'm the first screen to keep some of this stuff from getting to you if it's not worthwhile. But this is something that we think is worthwhile. This would definitely create no experience to 11-year experience compression issue at the same rate. So it's pretty easy when you see that.
So, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Next item, 5, resolution approving the county administrator 2025 work plan and 2024 work plan report.
Yeah, so we do this annually. It's basically the performance evaluation for your county administrator. So it's done by the chair of the administration committee and the county board chair. So they sat down with the county administrator and had a talk with him and went over things. Went over performance, where we were for the goals that were set last year, and established goals for the next year. So that's what the resolution's doing. So if you'd like to talk about any of those, the prior years or the goals for next year, and add your input on it, have at it.
Did we talk about just reviewing the wage grid, or did that, where did that go?
Yeah, that was on one of the suggestions, because that had come up at a meeting. And I think what we determined was it wasn't necessarily going to be a county administrator goal, but that was something that we were going to do. So Audrey's going to do it, not me. But we are going to review it. It's just, I think it's going to be a lot like when we looked at a high performer plan. We looked at it and came back to you and said, what we're doing is probably the best option that we have. We really think that's going to be the end result of it. So we will do that look at it, and we'll report back to you at some point. But it didn't make the list for county administrator goals.
Mr. Chairman? Just a comment. I think the goals are just fine. I'd support them. Relative to the budgeting, could the administrator just comment on, we just got the data on the equalized value from the state of Wisconsin. Could you comment on how that impacts budgeting as we look forward to the tax levy?
Yeah, I already know probably what the answer is within a couple pennies on there. I don't know if I'm going to hit exceptional, but will definitely be great. So it's really just a mathematical equation. I know what our levy limit is, so I know what the maximum tax is that we can, and then I divide that by the equalized value, which is the value of all the properties in the county, and that's your tax levy rate. So it's going to be right around $2.70 next year. So not to spoil the entire budget process, but that's the end result of it. So within a couple pennies of that is where we end up. So yeah, everything is positive.
And from what I can recall from our sister counties, that's a pretty terrific tax levy rate. I don't recall where exactly we sit, but that's really high. And that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, we'll compare that to where everyone is. We're slowly gaining ground on some of the counties that are ahead of us, but I think we're in the top 12 in the state for having the lowest tax levy rate, not highest. It's like a golf score, low is better.
I'll say I really appreciate number 3. I think that will be great for our other county board members and the public to hear a little more deeper dive into what's going on in the county.
Yep, that'll be a work in progress. So as you start seeing those reports, potentially at the next county board meeting, I haven't written it yet, but I plan to start it real soon. Just let me know if there's something more that you want to see, or if there's a category that we're not covering in that, could you add that block? So just think about it as a work in progress over the first few months till we get a pattern set.
Would you like a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I'll move the adoption of this resolution.
So we have a motion to adopt. We have a second by Bob Long. Motion by Bob Fiedler. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Thank you. And the financial report for July 2024.
Yeah, we'll skip down to the last couple of sheets. Those are usually the more interesting ones. So when we look at the vehicle registration fees coming in, those have sort of leveled off now. I think we got our new average, about 155,000 per month coming in for that. And then on the sales tax, as Supervisor Shirley had noted, we're still trailing behind where we've been the last couple of years. So sales tax, the volume of sales occurring within the county have definitely decreased from where we were last year. So this is a leading indicator whenever you look at a potential recession. And again, recessions are always measured in hindsight. You never say, we're going into a recession. They go, oh, look, we've been in a recession. But this is one of the indicators that will show you that data. And as you look at the whole year and we look back, if we finish below where we were last year, that's going to tell you that we had been in a recession. So the data early in the year was a little bit mixed, where we were real low and then real high, and now we're kind of averaging in that 900,000 range, where we had been over 1 million a year last year pretty consistently. So again, this will be something we continue to watch. But because of our conservative budgeting, it won't have a negative fiscal impact on us. Capital projects, ARPA projects, those are all, especially the ARPA ones, you can see a lot of closed projects now as we're wrapping those up.
So you have an idea at the end of the ARPA funding? I know we have to have it spent out by the end of the year. Or what are we on track for the transfer into mechanicals for the building?
So far, I've closed out projects that had excesses of $755,000.
I'm sorry, we have an excess now of 755.
Yeah, so I've closed projects, and as I've closed those projects, if they had any excess budgeted amounts, I've reallocated that to the Government Center HVAC construction project, and so year-to-date, I've reallocated $755,873 to that project.
I would support that ultimately when we get to it, to support an HVAC. I just want to revisit something slightly, and that is that give or take 6, 8, 9 months ago, I did offer an amendment at the board that would have dealt with how we allocated CASA monies, and I'm a strong supporter of CASA in every way, but my feeling was we had overspent on CASA. We get what, $300,000, and that was a huge amount of an increase. And so at the time, I suggested, well, let's support it, but let's only support it to the tune of $200,000, which I felt would be way generous on our part and would easily carry them through, particularly if they were soliciting outside grant money. We've had reports from the director of CASA the last 2 quarters at the Public Protection Committee, and they're doing reasonably well in their grant solicitations. They're going to report to us again in September on that, and I expect another reasonably positive report. What I'd suggested with that extra $100,000 that I would have cut from CASA was we put it toward 2 other, I'll call them social service projects, some of which dealt with public protection issues, some of which did not. In round numbers, because it was just under the number I'm going to state for accounting purposes, I suggested $50,000 go to the Salvation Army in New Richmond, And we already have many contracts with them. They take care of inmates when they're released in January 15th in a 20-degree below zero weather. They can be housed at the Salvation Army in New Richmond. We need to house them somewhere. It costs a lot of money. And I'd suggested $50,000 for Turning Point for basically women who are abused. As I recall, it was a close vote, but we turned down that amendment. And I'd just like the administrator to just ask if he could make a comment on what that would do if we were to revisit that and accept those two amendments in round numbers. I think we kind of said 49,000, so we wouldn't have to have an accounting issue. But could you comment on that? And you know, some folks would say, well, we don't have contracts with them. Well, we do have contracts with Salvation Army at least, and I don't know about Turning Point. But these were things that were very specifically talked about in the purposes for ARPA. And again, HVAC could also go into that because we wanted clean air in the buildings, right? But these two also fell well within the guidelines for what ARPA funds should be spent for. Would the administrator concur, and would you believe that these would be reasonable expenditures without terrifically hurting the HVAC contribution?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, the projects, I mean, we could probably eloquently explain how they qualify for ARPA. I mean, it's really a very subjective description. I mean, because they're within the parameters of the different ARPA guidelines. So you just have to write it persuasively enough, which we could probably do. The $50,000 is a changing point on how you have to report it and the level of detail. So $49,999 would be my preference or below. And then as far as allocations, I've recorded the 755. I could probably modify that, although there are probably other projects that are still due to be closed out under budget. But we're getting down to the end on reporting of the dollars.
So what I'm hearing is it wouldn't be unreasonable if I were to make an amendment along the lines we just discussed to do
Well,
that.
I think it would be a request for a future agenda item, because what we're under right now is the financial report. So I'm reporting on
Well,
the details.
I guess that's true.
Yep, so, and that's fine to discuss, you know, how we've been spending the money and
All right, I
and how
agree with
you
that.
want to. But that would be probably the proper procedure.
Do you have any idea with the still open projects, if a rough idea of how much they're gonna be under budget? Any idea?
No, not really. You know, I mean, they are gonna finish under budget. And like the Onyx rental assistance program, we spent 12,300 year to date. There's 37,900 left. I mean, there's probably gonna be 25,000 left over. So you figure if you double the numbers that you're seeing in that column where that 12,300 is, this is our year to date spend on it, I think. So if you double that, or take that much again out of what the balance is here, that's probably fairly close, other than maybe the behavioral peer recovery support specialist. That's a program that we hope to extend into 2025. So you have to allocate the dollars by the end of 2024. You can't move them anymore after that. But you can still spend them all the way through 2026. And what I've told HHS is that I'm comfortable spending or allocating enough to go through 25. If it went into 26 a little bit, fine, but I don't want to budget 2 years worth. I'll budget 1 year's worth, and we'll do that. And that's the only project, though, that we're looking at doing that. Everything else will close out on schedule at the end of 24 through a reallocation to the HVAC. So yes, there's going to be some. I don't know that I could accurately tell you exactly how much, though.
so.
Bob, do you want to provide the Onyx rental assistance? What was that project again? Yep. Unless you just want to shout from the back of the room, but I don't think they'll pick up on the mics as well.
What was the question, Ken?
The Onyx rental assistance program, could you refresh my memory on what that project is?
It was rental assistance for people entering the Onyx. Onyx House is a recovery housing project. So they help people in early recovery and give them a place to stay with recovery supports. This was rental assistance for the first month's rent for people that didn't have a job yet and to help them get established before they were required to get a job by the program.
How different is that from the Salvation Army housing? You know, I mean, obviously there's some difference there, I know that, but I mean, how much difference is there? What's the gap there in that programming?
Are you talking about Grace Place? Or
Yes, Grace Place
Grace Place is a
specifically.
homeless shelter, so that's really just an emergency shelter environment. Recovery housing is more of a, it's not a shelter environment. You have to qualify to get in, so to speak. You have to remain abstinent. You have to take part in recovery activities and look for a job and look for housing and all of those things. And it's not the same population maybe that you would, and there's crossover, right? But it's not the same population you might see in an emergency housing situation, or it could be families, it could be people with all kinds of different reasons why they're struggling to find housing. So this would be specific to people in recovery from addiction. The recovery housing would be.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
So you don't need any approvals.
No approvals. This is the financial report. If there's no further questions, I rest my case.
Anybody have anything else? Yeah. Okay. We'll move on to request for future agenda items, and I think Bob Fiedler, you have a couple for
I'll
those.
just suggest we add the two items I discussed relative to the ARPA expenditures for the next committee meeting.
So we'll add those on for the next meeting. Any other future agenda items from anyone? Seeing none, we'll move on. Any announcements? So no announcements. So the date of the next meeting will be September 17th, 2024 in the new area.
Yep, we'll be in the new county boardroom. That should be the first meeting in the new space. So if there's any stains, we know who's responsible.
And I think that's also Constitution Day, so it's kind of interesting. We have our first government meeting on Constitution Day.
Yep.
So with that being said, we'll adjourn at 6:27. Thank you.